In a neighborhood where lawn height is monitored more fiercely than crime, one resident's tiny patio upgrade would accidentally expose the HOA president's secret construction and ignite the most outrageous scandal the street had ever seen. Before starting from beginning, please subscribe for more. The story began quietly, as HOA stories often did, under the surface, in the cracks between property lines and personal pride. The neighborhood of Willow Bend Meadows appeared peaceful to an outsider, with its manicured lawns, muted beige homes, and ornamental mailboxes that matched as if ordered from a catalog. But beneath the symmetry existed the invisible pulse of surveillance. Neighbors watching neighbors, board members watching everyone, and an HOA president who believed rules applied differently to himself. On a particularly warm weekend, the kind that made people want to sit outside and sip something cold, a resident named Lily decided to improve her small concrete patio. Not with anything extravagant, just a few tasteful pavers she found on sale and a low, decorative border to keep the mulch from spilling onto the walkway. She had lived in the neighborhood for 5 years and understood the rules well enough, but she'd seen others install similar features without issue. Besides, the improvement barely rose above lawn height and blended naturally into the yard. To her, it seemed like the kind of harmless upgrade that could slip quietly under the radar. But in Willow Bend Meadows, nothing slipped quietly. 3 days later, a bright white envelope arrived in her mailbox. It bore the emblem she had grown to dread: Willow Bend Meadows Homeowners Association, embossed in green like a warning label. Inside, she found a violation notice printed in bold, officious lettering, accusing her of unauthorized structural modification of exterior living space. A fine of $200 accompanied the accusation, along with a demand to restore the patio to original state within 10 days. There was no explanation, no photo, no courtesy warning, only the fine and the threat of additional penalties. Lily felt a familiar mix of irritation and resignation. She'd heard stories: the neighbor fined for having the wrong shade of mulch, the couple reprimanded because their wreath was seasonally ambiguous, the man forced to replace his fence because its slats leaned at an inconsistent angle. But a patio border? That seemed especially petty. Still, she did what most residents did. She investigated the situation, hoping to understand what rule she had technically violated. She opened the HOA handbook, 82 pages of regulations written in language so stiff it could have been carved in stone. She flipped through sections on structural changes, landscaping modifications, and exterior decor. No matter how carefully she read, she found nothing about low stone edging or small patio expansions. The closest guideline referenced significant structural additions, which her project was clearly not. Her frustration grew. She wondered if there had been a mistake, or worse, if someone had singled her out. The HOA president, Martin Griggs, had a reputation for enforcement that bordered on obsessive. His yard was immaculate to the point of rigid perfection, with perfectly aligned hedges and matching ceramic planters that stood like sentinels by his front door. He patrolled the neighborhood during his evening walks, as if inspecting troops, often pausing in front of homes with narrowed eyes and a frown of deep concentration. Over the years, residents whispered about his eagerness to issue warnings and citations. Some claimed he enjoyed the power. Others believed he simply had too much free time. Whatever the reason, Martin's rule interpretations tended to be creative at best and draconian at worst. After rereading the violation letter twice, Lily decided she would not comply without answers. It wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. If she had genuinely broken a rule, she was willing to fix the issue, but she refused to simply accept an arbitrary fine without understanding why. The following morning, she began quietly asking neighbors whether they had experienced anything similar, or whether they had seen anything unusual that might explain the sudden attention to her patio. Most shrugged sympathetically. A few shared their own HOA horror stories. One neighbor, an older woman known for watering her flowers with unwavering consistency, whispered that she had noticed Martin walking behind homes recently, instead of sticking to the sidewalks. She said he seemed unusually preoccupied with the backyards, pausing behind fences as if inspecting something out of sight. This raised a question Lily hadn't initially considered. Why was the president suddenly paying such close attention to the rear sides of the properties? The front yards had always been the main battleground for HOA scrutiny. Curiosity turned into determination. Later that week, she walked the neighborhood path that wound behind the row of houses, including her own. Along the fence lines and behind sheds, she noticed nothing out of place. That is, until she approached the far corner of the street where Martin's property backed against the greenbelt. There, partially hidden by his tall privacy fence, she spotted something odd. Large stacks of lumber, bags of concrete mix, stone slabs, and what appeared to be roofing material. They were piled neatly but conspicuously, visible only if one approached from the narrow trail behind the homes. It was far more construction material than any small project would require. As she moved closer, she heard faint sounds, tools clinking, something heavy being shifted, and the unmistakable grinding noise of a power saw. It was coming from Martin's yard. A chill of realization spread through her. If this was what it sounded like, then her minor patio border was the least of anyone's concerns. Whatever Martin was building, he was doing it quietly, privately, and most importantly, without any of the approvals he demanded from everyone else. And if the HOA president himself was violating the very rules he was enforcing, well, that changed everything. The HOA president thought his towering backyard secret would stay buried, but one resident's curiosity would turn the entire neighborhood into a pressure cooker, ready to erupt with scandal and consequences. Lily stood on the narrow trail behind the homes, listening to the muffled hum of construction coming from Martin Griggs's yard. At first, she wondered if she was imagining the sounds. Perhaps the wind was distorting something from farther away. But the rhythmic scrape of a shovel confirmed it. Someone was working behind that fence, and it wasn't for a modest backyard improvement. She stepped back, blending into the shade of an old juniper tree, and surveyed the property from a distance. It wasn't unusual for residents to make changes to their yards, but anything more substantial than a garden bed required a submission packet, detailed sketches, and approval from the Architectural Review Committee. And under Martin's leadership, approval usually came slowly and with heavy restrictions. If anyone attempted something even slightly outside the rules, he shut it down with impressive speed, which made this discovery particularly ironic. Over the next few days, the noises continued. Construction materials multiplied. Lumber stacks disappeared and reappeared as if they were being consumed overnight. Bags of concrete steadily dwindled. The trail became a vantage point for observation, a quiet window into the secret project unfolding behind the president's fence. Each evening, Lily noticed new changes: fresh dirt piles near the gate, long wooden beams leaning against the fence, a tarp draped over a bulky shape. Nothing about the project looked small or temporary. In fact, the scale appeared far larger than anything allowed without prior written approval. The hypocrisy gnawed at her. Residents were fined for minor variations in fence height or a flower bed deemed too expressive, and yet here was the very person enforcing those standards constructing a massive, mysterious structure behind his home without any notice. If anyone else had attempted such a project, they would have been slapped with fines as thick as the HOA handbook itself. The more she observed, the more curious she became. But she knew she needed proof, something clear, concrete, undeniable. She didn't want to rely on rumors or secondhand stories. She wanted to know the truth. And she suspected that truth would be far more explosive than her original patio fine. One afternoon, she brought her dog for a walk along the trail behind the houses. It provided a perfect excuse to pause without arousing suspicion. As her dog sniffed dandelions along the fence line, she glanced upward. Through two narrow slats, she caught sight of what looked like the corner of a stone foundation, not a decorative garden feature, something larger, sturdier, intentionally built. The next day, she saw the frame of a structure rising several feet above the fence line. It resembled a raised deck, though larger than any she had seen in the neighborhood. It extended deep into the backyard, supported by thick posts anchored in concrete. There was no mistaking it now. Martin Griggs was building a full-scale patio, massive, elaborate, and entirely unapproved. Word began to spread, though not from Lily directly. Neighbors tended to notice anything that broke their tidy uniformity, and it wasn't long before curious glances drifted toward Martin's backyard. During evening strolls, several residents paused, whispering amongst themselves as the wooden beams pushed higher above the fence line. Some wondered aloud what the structure was for. Others speculated about its cost, its purpose, and its legality. But no one confronted him. After all, confronting the HOA president was akin to challenging a minor deity in Willow Bend Meadows. Few dared risk the wrath that came with scrutiny of their own properties. Lily, however, had reached her limit. The fine for her tiny patio border still sat on her kitchen counter, an irritating reminder of the double standard. She didn't mind a rules-based community. She minded selective enforcement. And this was selective enforcement on a grand scale. Still, she approached carefully. Rather than making accusations, she decided to document. Each day, she took photos from the public trail, distant, non-invasive, but clear enough to show the size and progress of the construction. She compiled them with dates and notes. She wanted a complete timeline, when the materials appeared, when the posts went up, when the framing expanded. She kept this quiet, waiting for the right moment. The moment arrived unexpectedly. One evening, the sunset cast long shadows over the trail as she walked behind the houses once more. But this time, something had changed. A new section of the structure rose so high it towered visibly over the fence line, far higher than any approved patio. It looked almost like an elevated platform, complete with railings and an overhang. The size of it was almost comical in comparison to the fines Martin issued for small decorative items. At that moment, she realized the hypocrisy wasn't just accidental, it was deliberate. He wasn't unaware of the rules. He was banking on the belief that no one would challenge him. He relied on fear, compliance, and the uncomfortable politeness that kept neighbors from questioning authority. That assumption was about to collapse. When the HOA president walked into the appeal hearing expecting obedience, he had no idea the resident he fined was about to expose his secret project and shatter his authority forever. The morning of the appeal hearing arrived with a thick, restless stillness hanging in the air, one of those days when the atmosphere felt charged, as if the neighborhood itself sensed that something was about to shift. Willow Bend Meadows, usually preoccupied with lawn care and mailbox maintenance, hummed quietly beneath the surface. Residents walked their dogs slower than usual. Curtains rustled with curious eyes behind them, and at the clubhouse, small clusters of homeowners gathered, pretending not to gossip while waiting for the door to open. Inside, the long conference table was set with printed agendas and plastic pitchers of lukewarm water. The Architectural Review Committee, consisting of 3 board members, sat stiffly with their papers organized in perfect symmetry. The vice president, a thin woman who clung to rule books like life rafts, tapped her pen with anxious precision. At the head of the table sat Martin Griggs, wearing the familiar expression of a man who expected deference, chin lifted, brows stern, posture rigid. He looked entirely unbothered, as if this meeting were nothing more than a routine reminder of his authority. Lily entered quietly, carrying a binder filled with printed photos, dates, and documentation of the massive construction project behind his home. She felt the weight of every resident watching her, the people tired of arbitrary enforcement, but too intimidated to challenge it themselves. Today, she wasn't just appealing a patio fine. She was exposing the truth they all suspected but never dared to confirm. The committee began with formalities, listing her violation, her fine, and the requirement that she restore her patio border to its original state. As they spoke, she watched Martin's expression shift from bored assurance to mild annoyance, as if he expected her to concede quickly so they could move on. But she didn't concede. Instead, she took a breath, opened the binder, and requested permission to present additional information relevant to her appeal. Her voice remained steady as she described the timeline of her patio improvement, how it complied with all visible regulations, how similar features appeared throughout the neighborhood, and how the HOA handbook contained no specific rule prohibiting it. The committee listened politely, nodding without commitment. Then she shifted. She explained how shortly after receiving the violation notice, she began noticing heavy construction behind the president's home. She described the materials stacked by the fence, the noises drifting up during the evenings, and the structure rising progressively higher with each passing day. She clarified that all her photos were taken from public access trails. No trespassing, no intrusion, only observation from shared property lines. As she spoke, she slid the printed photos across the table. The board members picked them up one by one, their eyes widened, brows lifted, and lips parted as they absorbed the sheer scale of the construction. The first images showed the early stacks of lumber. The next displayed anchored posts and concrete footings. Later ones revealed the expanding deck-like platform rising above the fence, unmistakably large and undeniably unapproved. Through it all, Martin sat motionless, his face gradually tightening. The confident glare he entered with dissolved into rigid silence. The more photos appeared, the more his composure cracked. His fingers clutched the edges of the table as if holding himself in place. The room felt charged with disbelief. Even the committee members exchanged glances. Not the polite glances of boardroom unity, but shocked, questioning looks that silently asked, did he really think this would go unnoticed? Lily continued laying out her case. She explained that her patio border posed no structural implications, no safety risks, and no visual disruption. Meanwhile, the president's project clearly exceeded height limits, required formal review, and had advanced to a stage that violated multiple sections of the architectural guidelines. She reminded them that residents had been fined for far less: minor decor choices, seasonal plants, slightly mismatched shades of trim. Then she simply stated that she wanted equal consideration. If she was fined for a harmless upgrade, then the HOA president's far larger, unapproved construction demanded enforcement consistent with the rules he imposed on everyone else. Silence followed, a long, trembling silence that felt like the entire room was inhaling at once. When the committee finally spoke, their voices lacked the confidence of usual proceedings. They excused themselves to confer privately, leaving the room filled with awkward, electric tension. Behind closed doors, muffled whispers rose, sharp, hurried, panicked. The kind of whispers shared by people who suddenly realized they had been complicit, even unintentionally, and supporting a leader who followed none of the rules he enforced. They returned after several long minutes. Their faces were uncertain, reluctant, but resolute. The decision was unanimous. The fine against Lily was dismissed immediately. Not only that, her patio border was approved retroactively under non-structural landscaping enhancement, a category that should have applied from the beginning. Then came the second decision. A formal investigation would be initiated to examine the president's backyard construction. Pending the results, Martin Griggs would be temporarily suspended from all HOA duties and barred from making enforcement decisions. The room erupted, not loudly, not chaotically, but with the unmistakable energy of restrained satisfaction. Residents exchanged nods, a few allowed thin smiles to break through. For the first time in years, the balance of the neighborhood had shifted. As Martin left the clubhouse, he moved stiffly, shoulders tight, jaw locked. His authority had cracked in public. His secret project had turned from a private indulgence into a community scandal, and he now faced the same scrutiny he had imposed on everyone else. In the following weeks, the investigation concluded that his structure violated multiple guidelines, exceeding height limits, lacking proper permits, encroaching on setback boundaries, and failing to obtain any architectural approval. He was issued significant fines, far larger than the one he attempted to impose on Lily, and ordered to dismantle the entire patio immediately. Residents watched as the towering platform was disassembled piece by piece, the sound of demolition echoing through the neighborhood like poetic justice. The HOA held a special election soon after, and Martin was removed from the board entirely. Lily kept her patio border exactly as it was, simple, tasteful, perfectly within the rules. And Willow Bend Meadows, for the first time in a long time, learned what happened when its own leaders believed they stood above the community they governed. In the end, nothing brought the neighborhood together quite like watching hypocrisy come down plank by plank.